Hello, and welcome to Curious Futurist, the show that explores how today's technological and economic trends are shaping tomorrow's world. I'm your host, the Curious Futurist. This week's guest is Aly Madhavji. Now, he's got to be one of the world's youngest acknowledged experts on emerging technologies. He's a senior blockchain fellow at the International Business School, INSEAD. He's been named a Blockchain 100 global leader. He's a United Nations consultant on emerging technologies in the Middle East and North Africa. And he's also managing partner of the Blockchain Founders Fund in Singapore, which invests in and advises early stage tech startups on growth. Now, with all this expertise, all this experience, what are we going to be talking about? Well, in today's interview, you'll see we cover a lot of topics to do with emerging technologies, but amongst them we'll be discussing how Aly became a UN consultant. In fact, how he almost didn't become a UN consultant. That's a pretty good story. We're also going to discuss what is perhaps the simplest or easiest way to really understand what blockchain is in practical terms and how it works, with some good examples of some of the world's leading companies and how they are already using blockchain to save billions in their supply chains. Now, we're also going to talk about something quite serious. Artificial intelligence is likely to replace a lot of our jobs over the next few years, but we are also going to get Aly's advice on what you can do now to prepare for this disruption if and when it reaches your industry. Are you ready to meet him? Good evening, Aly. Welcome to the show. How are you this evening?
Great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. We'll jump right in with a question. You've done so much in your career, but if you look at one of the things I think that a lot of people would be interested in right off the bat, so you're a consultant to the United Nations, and you're what, like 32 years old?
Little younger, but close enough.
Okay, so not even 32 years old. I think a lot of people would have the question, so like what, at the age of 32, what could you be possibly advising the UN about? And how does that sort of thing come about?
Yes, it's actually a good question. So one of the things that we're doing with the United Nations is we've been putting together one of the flagship reports for the UN on emerging technologies. And a big focus is of that is on the MENA region, so the Middle East and North Africa. And it's what the UN calls a practical report. And so it's actually looking at very clear ways that some of these technologies can get implemented to help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it's been very, very exciting. A lot of different discussions, a lot of very interesting ways that we've looked at applying different technologies, and blockchain is one of those technologies that can actually help solve different problems. You could think about problems related to identities, unbanked versus banked, and like lending, savings, and borrowings products, for example. And how could you go about those in regions where there might not be credit registries or asset registries, or like all sorts of like basic infrastructure that you would see in the developed world is missing. And then also looking at things like how can digital technology scale in certain countries more effectively than others, by, say, looking at 3G penetration, for example, right? And so this is like some very interesting things where some of the regions that we've been focused on have an ability to leapfrog just due to the fact that there is better access to internet, for example. Some of the other solutions aren't consumer facing, but they're more on the business front and looking at some of the inefficiencies with global financial markets, things like that in the developing world. So how it came about, it's actually a really funny story. It still humors me. So I actually I had someone from the UN actually reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I thought it was spam, and so I didn't respond. And then soon after, I was cleaning my inbox, maybe several weeks later, and I saw the message. I was like, this is weird. Like, why is the UN reaching out to me? It must be scammy. Like, I'm sure a lot of people understand. You get a lot of really random messages on LinkedIn, or at least I do. And oftentimes we're talking like 100+ messages a day on LinkedIn, right? And so I just dropped my email. Like literally that was the whole response. I said, thanks, here's my email. And that's it, right? And they sent me an email then. I was like, man, like this is weird. Like, why? Like, they actually emailed me, like, and I didn't think it was legitimate because I was sort of asking the same question, like, why is the UN sort of reaching out to me? And so I ignored it for a while, and then I was sort of going through my inbox and I saw it, and I was like, UN.org, like, is that the right link? Like, or is it UN.com or UN.org? I wasn't sure. So I like copied the end of the person's email, put it into Google, and I was like, oh shit, it is actually the UN. And so then I responded, and I was like, okay, happy to get on a call and sort of hear this out. And their sort of whole take was looking at these emerging technologies, and really how to practically implement them and their benefits of them. You know, they didn't want what they've typically done. And what they've typically done is they've gone to someone that's, you know, been writing these reports for 20, 30 years. They're probably in their 60s, right? And they would just be there to pump out reports consistently, right? And the UN would sort of engage them to sort of pump out reports. And that's not what they wanted. So they wanted to create something that was more practical, that could have very clear ways on how these technologies get implemented, and look sort of outside of the box on ways that some of these systems could change with the use of new technologies. And so that's been great. I mean, it is quite interesting working on some of these problems. There's a lot of governments at the UN sort of getting involved. It has been a little thrown off with COVID. Just the UN has obviously been delayed, as has, you know, all sorts of organizations around the world. And so that's been a challenge, of course, but, you know, we're still sort of optimistic on some of the things that we're proposing in here, and a lot of the work that we've done with the UN on making a big difference to a number of countries.
Well, I mean, it sounds really cool, but I mean, how did they just sort of, they heard about you, or like
Yeah, so
somebody there had worked with somebody you'd worked with, or?
no, it had never worked. Yeah, so they had heard about me, and they actually, what they had said was, you know, we think you're one of the global experts on these emerging technologies. And so that was a link between, I had previously worked at PayPal, and had also done a fintech startup, and then also given sort of what we do at Blockchain Founders Fund and have all sorts of companies across all sorts of fields. They sort of found all of that mixed together, along with sort of several master's degrees in different parts of the world, including in China. And so they saw that as sort of a culmination of things that they saw as someone that was younger and could bring new perspective to the table on how to actually drive change, plus sort of some of the accolades and other things that have sort of happened. They thought that was interesting as a way to drive change in the way that they currently did processes and change in these countries.
So, how does it actually work then? I mean, you're very busy. This isn't something you're doing all the time. With that in mind, like, if you're putting together a report or doing research for the United Nations, I mean, what does that look like on a practical level?
Yeah. So whatever you're thinking, much more intensive. It's actually quite intense. So I mean, our team's been supporting on this, and we, you know, myself, I've also been heavily involved in it, right? And so there's tons of research. I mean, we must have gone through thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of reports to just learn about different things. A lot of interviews with experts to understand some of the nuances in these countries, because you can't just come with an outside perspective and try to create solutions. I mean, you got to understand how all of these systems are working and all of the nuances in these countries. And so that was sort of another aspect. I also spent some time in the region. This was before COVID. Spent some time also with the UN in Lebanon as well, which is sort of where their headquarters is for MENA. And so, you know, there was sort of all of these different things. And then there was a lot of just talking to other experts as well to try to understand, like, how could innovative technologies really come in here? Because it can't just be my own opinions or sort of our own team's opinions. We're literally looking to talk to a number of experts to understand, like, how could we transform a problem where 1.7 billion people don't have identities, right? Like, you know, what do we do in this scenario, right? And so looking at that, or like the unbanked populations, and like, what are solutions that could actually work? And some of the things that we've come up with are very fascinating, right? Like, for example, you know, potentially looking at can there be a decentralized system that leverages facial recognition technology, which is good enough now across the world. It's being used at scale in a lot of countries now. can you use that as a way to start creating like credit scores, for example, and credit when even if they don't have an identity. So like if you were to show up on one of these, that's sort of the first time and sort of creates that initial profile. And then, as you have further interactions that require credit, it sort of does a facial check and then it links it to that, to that profile. And so now you can start building credit in countries where there isn't even credit systems, right? And so like, and this technology you can do at scale at, relatively low cost than, trying to create, say, like identity centers all over the country and try to print out hundreds of millions or tens of millions of identities, and then like the fraud related to those identities and how to keep those secure, and like all sorts of other issues of where governments have already failed. So there's lots of interesting things that we're looking at. Of course, like there's a lot of nuances to that. But like in short, like I think it gives you a little bit of an idea of the things that we're sort of experimenting and looking at.
I guess this is an example, I think you touched upon it a little bit before, where if you're in a region that doesn't have the same kind of infrastructure, but also it's a region then that doesn't have some of the sort of technology legacy problems that you get in more developed regions as well. So there's the possibility to leapfrog in development in some ways, right?
Absolutely.
You've become obviously, this is evidence of the fact that you're seen as something of an expert in a lot of technologies. I mean, the first one that springs to mind, of course, for various reasons, is blockchain. Senior blockchain fellow at INSEAD, the business school. You've been named as a blockchain 100 global leader. I mean, how do you become such a specialist in a technology like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I still wonder myself how I ended up on that blockchain 100 list. I think I saw that when someone shared it with me, and they were like, "Hey, you showed up on this list," and I had no idea. And so that was very nice to see, of course. And I think the big thing for us and what I do is, we're just passionate on driving real meaningful change and just love doing it, right? And so that's what drives me every single day. And I think that's what drives our team to go out there and make a difference. And you look at the impact of these technologies, such as blockchain, and what it's already doing and what the potential that it has to do in terms of changing the world. And it's mind blowing in terms of what it can do. And so, that's something that we've been working on for a lot of years, been involved in the sector, and just seeing how fast it's actually transforming. And it's exciting. And so just, being part of that journey, helping out where we can. And we've got, of course, a lot of incredible companies around the world, creating, extremely large change across all sorts of sectors, right? And so that's a big part of what we do.
So blockchain is one of those technologies. I think most people have heard of it now, mainly, I guess, with regard to Bitcoin and some of those cryptocurrencies like that. But for a lot of people, we have some idea of kind of what it is, but not really. I mean, it's quite hard to understand, I think, when you're not in it. So you must have had the challenge now of kind of trying to explain blockchain in all kinds of different ways to all kinds of different people. I mean, what would you say is perhaps the most effective or the simplest way to try and explain kind of not just what blockchain is, but what the real potential is for it to change things in a quite dramatic way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of answers that I've heard to this question just really overcomplicate it, and sort of the way that we look at it and use in sort of our decision making is, blockchain at the end of the day is a system or an enabler to solve inefficiencies due to human trust issues. And so you can think about any scenario where you need to essentially trust someone, say from like a business perspective, or there's multiple parties that need to trust each other. You can essentially have blockchain solve these trust issues. And so, between two different parties, you can use things like pre-programmable contracts that essentially program out the things that you would normally trust someone on. But now you could essentially like escrow, say, like funds in cyberspace and have it pay out based on some sort of outcome. You could look at, multi-parties and trust, say, related to, food supply chain, right? I mean, you look at sort of how supply chain works. And I mean, you're based in Europe, so you're probably aware of sort of the European horse meat scandal that I think happened in 2013.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so, the situation essentially was that what was being labeled as beef was essentially up to and as much as 100% horse meat in up to 13 countries. And, you had supermarkets like Tesco, like major supermarkets, selling this stuff. And like, that was a trust issue, right? You were trusting that whatever you were getting, was what they said it was. And then you didn't really have a way to check properly. And even if you did DNA samples, you couldn't get to the bottom of it easily, right? Which is why Interpol was making arrests till 2017. Like 4 years later, they still hadn't gotten to the bottom of it, right? Which is crazy. And so, if you had a system where, all of the parties are essentially documenting into the same system, then now you're getting rid of a lot of the inefficiencies between 50 parties having 50 different systems. So that's one major benefit. Mm-hmm. But like, of course, in that scenario, if you were trying to lie or be deceitful about, horse meat being beef, you would still do that in a blockchain, right? Like that's not going to change. You're going to say like, hey, this is beef, but you're going to put horse meat. But the thing is, there's DNA samples that happen. Like there's food testing, there's DNA samples. And in that same scenario, in the European horse meat scandal, like they did a lot of these. The thing is, then they couldn't pinpoint and figure out like where in the supply chain it was coming from because there's all these different parties. And so it took so long. But in this scenario, you know exactly where that came from. And so the second you do these DNA samples, you'd be like, this is good, these are bad. And then you know exactly all the people involved. And then you do a couple more checks in the middle and you can sort of get to the bottom of it. And so this is like a huge thing, right? And it's the same case. This is not just Europe, right? Like, I mean, the US had the Chipotle Mexican Grill one where there was the listeria outbreak and it was $10 billion of shareholder value eroded in a very short period. And it was the same thing. They couldn't get to the bottom of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's happened in China as well, melamine scandal, 2008. And so like you have this happen all over the world and, it's not just food safety. It can be all sorts of other things, but you have all these systems that are built on like trust and inefficiency rather than having say like this single layer that can go across multiple businesses as sort of like a shared database that all these parties can collaborate on but can't manipulate. And it just makes so much sense, right? And this is why you're seeing companies use it more and more. But at the end of the day, like we're looking at this and the way that it continues to grow is just solving those inefficiencies related to human trust.
So, and I guess one thing you touched on there as well, because when you say trust, I think some people will go, it's a shame we need to rely on technology and can't trust people and whatever. But I think one of the things you touched on there is, in a lot of cases, it's the complexity of the systems as well that we have. You've got several systems all trying to work towards the same thing. And as you said, it's the inefficiency. It's a way of simplifying it all so that the tracing of things, all different kinds of things, would be so much easier, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that's like a whole another part, but there's all of this additional inefficiency related to like capital payments, right? Like you see these like, you need these very long payment terms because it takes 30 days to then get through the system, then get to accounting, then accounting's got to process it, and like then they're sending like a check or a wire or whatever. But there's like all these delays along the way. But all this can be programmed out, right? Like what happens when X happens, and so you can actually build out a lot of this with much more efficiency. And then you look at the unlocking of capital and the benefit of that, and the increase in velocity of money and the economic impact. And there's all of these things that sort of come out from that have tremendous impacts.
I think examples might be the best way as well. Do you have any examples of some of the companies either you've worked with or that you're aware of who are they developing blockchain-based solutions or using blockchain right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of like great examples out there. I mean, we have a lot of our portfolio companies that I can also talk to, but maybe I can mention some of those later. I think like some interesting ones to bring up would be, for example, I don't know, like Walmart, like since we were sort of talking about supply chain, right? So Walmart actually has done quite a lot on the blockchain front. And so actually they started off first with pork on blockchain. And so they did this in China with Tsinghua University, which is my alma mater. And they were doing it to prevent national foodborne outbreaks. And And so that whole sort of experiment went well. They were looking at, essentially tracking from producers, processors, distributors, and grocers. That all went well. And they said, okay, let's go with something even more complex, right? So that was sort of a pilot. Let's go with something more complex. So they said something that's even more complex is in North to South America, sliced mangoes, because it's just much more middlemen in that process for them. And like, also like if you were to walk into a Walmart in Arkansas and you were like, where did these sliced mangoes come from? And you're looking at just a package of sliced mangoes, like how can they track it? So this would actually take them 7 days to do before they implemented the blockchain. 7 days of like manual, like figuring out all these paperwork, figuring out where these came from, all the people involved. So now they can do it in 2.2 seconds. Like that's live. That's live. Like this is, yeah, which is crazy, right? You think about like, that's a huge benefit. And that's like, still, I mean, it's a big one, but like it can get much bigger. And so they were like, let's go even further, right? So Walmart says, let's go further. In China, then they went back to sort of the China region. They said, let's do for Walmart China with VChain and Tsinghua University, let's actually create more transparency for our users or our consumers. And so their goal by the end of this year, which I'm sure will be slightly delayed with COVID, but the goal by the end of this year was to have 50% of all fresh meat, 40% of vegetables, and 12.5% of all seafood that they're selling in China on blockchain. And the big benefit of this is, as a consumer, you can just walk into any Walmart then, scan the QR code on the product, know exactly, like, say if you're getting beef, exactly what that cow, like where that cow's from, like what weight it was, how healthy it was, what was it, grass-fed or grain-fed, who its veterinarian was, like all sorts of information that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And this will drive better customer loyalty. It'll drive, whether that increases margins or not, like it'll either make people willing to pay more or they're just not willing to pay for the other stuff because these guys give more information. And so it's definitely going to drive better retention. And this is a big deal because then you look at other products like seafood is mislabeled, I believe, the majority of the time in North America. And so the ability to track this properly is very important. There's other great examples that aren't supply chain. I just wanted to touch on that one because we were sort of mentioning some stuff on supply chain earlier. But like take, I don't know, HSBC, for example, right? Let's go finance. So HSBC actually does FX settlements, right? Between their different entities essentially, right? And globally. And so they said, we want to create a system that's on blockchain that can be even more efficient. And so they went through this exercise and now they've built it out fully. It's been almost a couple of years now, I believe. And since then they've done 11.6 million trades on their blockchain. And it's been over $1.2 trillion of value moved. And they've saved 25% over their traditional process, which is crazy, right? Like this is huge. Like everyone's going to follow suit in their industry because you have to. It's just an ROI calculation, right? And so like these are like very real things that organizations are doing. Now, of course, these are more private blockchain initiatives. There's a lot of stuff happening on the public blockchain, and a lot of people, depending on sort of how much in the blockchain space they might sort of dislike sort of that private space, but I think it's very real. It's creating real value. It makes a lot of sense. On the public blockchain stuff, there's a lot of good stuff happening as well. But I think there's still challenges on scaling, right? So depending on the blockchain that you're looking at, there are still challenges on scaling. We're seeing that right now with, a big movement in decentralized finance, a lot of congestion on the networks, costs soaring on the Ethereum network and even on Bitcoin network and stuff like that. And so these are still challenges with public blockchains. But there's, I think a lot of exciting potential.
Yeah. I mean, it feels very much like, the private blockchains are kind of where it's at right now, where public feels like it's still a bit more experimental. There are perhaps more problems involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking about crazy amounts of volumes being transacted, right? So, to put it into sort of perspective, we're talking about, like on Tether today, there's been $45 billion of volume today, right? So it's still quite large numbers. There's still a lot of movement. There's a lot of things happening. But I do agree that, there's still a long way to go in terms of scaling these protocols to be able to drive the sort of value that we think it can drive over, say, the next decade or 2 decades.
Yeah, because I guess this is one of those good examples of where when the tipping point's reached, the potential for change here is definitely exponential, and then it will suddenly be, it'll have such an effect that we've probably not seen before.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of ways this could go, right? So like, we're not of the camp that we know exactly what'll happen, right? We don't, and that's sort of the beauty of it. But we see a lot of potential. Like, you look at the developing world, and we were talking about sort of unbanked and versus banked, and you look at the developing world, and you're like, well, isn't it frustrating that you've got well over 1 billion people that are unbanked? Like, this is not something that should be happening, but basically banks decided that it's not worth our time and money to go after these individuals, right? And there's also other problems sort of associated with it, right? But then you say like, well, everyone's talking about how do we get the unbanked to become banks, and they're thinking of it in the traditional sense, but like, do you need to, right? Like, can you just skip being banked and you just move fully to digital, right? Like, you've got your lending, savings, and borrowings products all digital. You've got like digital identities. You don't even need to deal then with the traditional form of a bank at all. And like, maybe that's where it goes, and that's probably a more scalable and faster solution and a lower cost solution when you think about the fact that banks don't want to deal with these individuals because they just don't have as much money. And so this is a solution that actually is much more scalable. And that's a big deal, right? If that is something that could happen, say, in like the next 10 to 20 years, that could be, game changing on the planet. That includes 1 billion new people into economic systems potentially. And so it's fascinating to sort of look at these things and say, well, does it have to follow the way that it's happened before? And the answer is not always yes, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. There's a huge potential there. So, I mean, we've mentioned it a few times here now, but so you're also the managing partner of the Blockchain Founders Fund. Can you just explain for people kind of like briefly what that is, and then sort of your role then within it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a few things that we do, but sort of in a nutshell, there's 3 main things that we focus on. So the first is our investment side. That's where we invest in early stage companies between seed and pre-A. We also invested in another fund called Loyal VC, where we're on the investment committee, and I'm also a venture partner there. And so between the two, we have well over 100 portfolio companies. We also just recently invested in one of Tim Draper's funds as well. That'll sort of get announced soon, but I think sneak peek, I guess, for everyone that's listening. And then the second part of what we do, sort of our consulting side, you heard about the UN piece, what we do within INSEAD as well, one of the leading business schools in the world. And then the third part of what we do is our venture program. And our venture program is extremely unique. This is where we work very hands-on with select founders that we believe are very promising to help them solve 3 problems. So the first is around strategy, the second on product market fit and early stage sales traction, which we work with them very hands-on on. And the third is helping them get investment ready, and we invest in those investment rounds and help them drive those investment rounds. And this has gone extremely well. We've got a lot of really, really great companies like Splinterlands is now the #1 blockchain game and #1 decentralized application in the world. BeatDap recently got ranked in the top 20 music tech companies in the world by Crunchbase. Banks and Neobank out of Europe, raising at I believe a 9-figure valuation now, and that's all getting signed off on, and that's going well. Johnton recently launched the lowest cost health coverage in the United States, and that's been really, really attractive, and I think helping a lot of people. And so we've have a lot of really incredible companies as part of that. And it's just very unique how we work with our founders, very hands-on. So we don't think of it as an accelerator, but just something much more hands-on and targeted to actually scale and grow and focus on sort of the key things that matter for a startup.
Yeah. So what would you say then is the difference, like between what you do? So you've explained what you do, but then an accelerator by contrast would do what?
Yeah, so we're involved with some accelerators. So some accelerators are great. The challenge is most accelerators statistically don't create value. And there's very few that do. From the data, if you were to look at, which ones are creating a lot of value, you can see things like, for example, Y Combinator creates value, or China Accelerator and the SOSV accelerators, which SOSV is one of the largest, VCs in the world, and we support a lot of their portfolio companies and their accelerators. And then you've got, some others as well. But for the most part, the thing is, like, companies end up, failing faster. They end up running out of money in a lot of cases quicker. And so from the data, like, they don't end up better off going through these programs. And the reason that, we sort of see that is, if you look at the key reasons why early stage companies fail, and then you say, like, is this the things that startups like accelerators provide? In most cases, it's not aligned, right? And they provide some of the stuff, but not enough of it, right? So, for example, most startups will fail because of product market fit, and not figuring out really, like, who's supposed to use their product, how to reach them, and then actually reaching out to them, and then getting onto conversations, and then figuring out how to tailor it, and then selling it, right? Yeah. And so when you go to an accelerator, like, sure, they talk about product market fit, and they might say, like, and have a session with 15 CEOs and say, like, product market fit's important, we should do some stuff with reaching out to some potential customers, but, like, it's not targeted enough, and they don't actually help you do it, right? And so, like, where we would be different is, like, we don't run these group sessions. Everything's super targeted on your organization. But then we say, like, we'll just help you figure it out. We'll like, so if you're, I don't know, if you're targeting the insurance industry, and you're saying, like, hey, I need to target certain key decision makers at insurance companies because they're going to be our client. Well, then we'll just help you figure out who's every single person that matches that in every single insurance company in North America. And then we'll help you figure out how to reach out to them, right? And then we'll create automation processes and use a lot of split testing to see if the messaging is working, et cetera. And so this works much more effectively because we're hands-on with those companies to actually help them actually do the things that they need to do and bring in processes that they may not know how to do themselves, right?
Well, I mean, this is very interesting because it means obviously you're investing in companies. Do you invest in all the companies actually that you are working with?
So in our venture program model, like, we do hold equity in all of the companies, and then we look to invest in them on their next financing round.
Got it. I guess what I was coming to is just the fact that what's fascinating about it is, I think, for people who don't know the industry very closely or aren't really in it, is you take these companies and you're helping them in a lot of cases kind of refine what it is they offer and who they're offering it to, and help them actually do that. And so in a lot of cases they won't have sales, or they won't have very many sales. So therefore, what is it that you look for when you go, right, this is a company that's definitely got what it takes to succeed? So, like, how do you see that? Like, what do you look for that?
Yes, it's a good question, actually. So we actually have a process internally where our team goes through about 90 different things as part of our due diligence. And it ranges from, team and background to what they're solving, the market size of the problem that they're solving, to defensibility of the product, like all sorts of stuff. Like, it's a pretty comprehensive set of things that our team goes through. At the end of the day, the challenge is that the startup may not know who they're selling to in reality, and may not even know when they actually even have a product ready. So, like, we've actually had cases like where, for example, we were on a call with a CEO, and they said, we're building this sort of big product. It's going to be almost like an ecosystem type of product. It's got all these different things it can do, but it's going to take us another year to build it. And we said, well, actually, and this was all within one call, right? We're like, well, actually, this is probably 5 products, this, and this. And actually, you can launch these 2 tomorrow, and you can actually put these 3 on hold, and you can go to market with this, and then we can actually see if people even want it. And then that's actually what they did, right? And so, but but it's about understanding like how can you actually go test this and actually get feedback and then build the product then around your customer, because then your customer will tell you what they want, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of an important part of it. And so a lot of founders we also find are like sort of scared to go to market in some ways. Like they would prefer in a lot of cases continuing to just build, but not actually just going out to the market and just seeing what happens. And that user feedback and is sort of so critical, and it just accelerates everything so much if you go out there and you just try. And if you fail fast and rebuild and improve, I mean, you're much more likely to, find successes then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've seen this before myself, where you can see with companies that either they are just scared to go to market, they're scared of rejection, or they're scared of not knowing really who it's for, and going through that process of finding out like whether they have something that the market really wants, or going through the process of changing and adapting and evolving what they have. But also, I think there are quite a few people, especially when it comes to technology, they want to try and get out there with something that's perfect or close to something that they have in their head. And then, of course, you put in all that extra money, extra time, extra effort. You launch something, and then people don't want it.
Absolutely. I think the thing that we sort of always say with our companies is we're always wrong, and so are you, right? Like, because we know that, like, we don't have the answers, and neither do they, because like we just need to go understand from the customer. Like we have hypothesis always, and we take our best guesses, and you just go figure, like you just go fail. Like you'll figure it out, get feedback, improve, get feedback, improve, and then you've got something that's working. And that's always our philosophy. We tell our companies this every time, like we're always wrong, right? And it's the only way to look at it, because we don't know every nuance of every industry. And even if you worked in an industry for 20 years, I can guarantee you don't know every nuance of the industry. So like this is sort of very important. Of course, like our CEOs that have a lot of experience in their industry, like to definitely have an advantage on that piece. But like we still often realize that a lot of the things that they think are the way that it works isn't always the way that it works. Just when you start talking and getting into customer discussions on a certain product. And so that's where that adaptability is very important.
Yeah, yeah. So what else do you look at then when it comes to companies and their potential, say, not just financial or sort of, potential market demand, but we talked earlier about, for example, the sort of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously, a lot of the work that you do with them is about kind of inclusivity or inclusiveness, which is one of those goals. Bringing more people into the sort of global financial system who aren't in there already. Do you look at things like this then, sort of sustainable goal type things? Obviously, climate change is a huge worry right now. There are lots of others. How much does this inform kind of what you look at when you look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, we are ROI driven, right? On the fund, and so our whole piece is to maximize ROI. Personally, I have a very strong affinity to social causes, and so there's our team. And so we always look at that, right? And there's no reason why things that have a social angle can't be extremely profitable as well, right? So you look at like the ed tech sector is a great example, right? One of the hottest sectors in the world, especially in Asia. And, there's obviously a huge social angle to this, right? And so we've got, for example, an edu fintech, what we call it, sort of an education focused fintech company that's working with a lot of schools in sub-Saharan Africa, and helping them implement like learning management systems and digital payments. And that's sort of working out really, really well. But there's all sorts of other companies that we have that, help reduce food waste for restaurants, or do all sorts of other things, related to say like fitness or other things that, impact different things. But it really depends, because we wouldn't look at something purely and say like, hey, this is social, but we don't think it'll make money, but it's the right fit for us, right? Like it still needs to be and have an ROI driven approach. But we love working on things that have a social angle, of course.
Yeah, of course. So besides blockchain, then, what other technologies? I mean, obviously you work with all kinds of technologies, but which ones do you think have the greatest potential to really transform our world in the next, I don't know, 2 years, 5 years? And in what sort of ways do you think?
Yeah, so the big way that we sort of look at it, right, is with any of these technologies, it's not about the technology alone. So like blockchain alone, to be honest, is not doing much, right? And it's about, and I'm probably gonna get some flack for that one, but anyways,
How about that?
um, but looking at sort of the convergence of technologies, right? And as they sort of converge, that's where you create sort of real opportunity to create transformational change. And so you look at, in that supply chain example that I gave you, it's the combination of blockchain and IoT, right? Because you're going to need a lot of sensors that can create and push like machine to machine data that's pushing that into a system. There's also human inputted data as well. But like a big part of that is going to be linking blockchain with IoT based devices, or you look at like blockchain paired with AI and like what does that create as an opportunity versus AI alone or blockchain alone, right?
Mm.
And so there's a lot of really interesting things when you start looking at the intersections of technologies and how they're sort of developing and progressing and what sorts of opportunities that opens up. So that's where in particular we're very interested. We do have quite a lot of companies that leverage AI in all sorts of ways. Companies that leverage, for example, IoT and other aspects. We don't have a ton with IoT just because we don't focus as much on hardware, but there is some stuff. And so the big thing is just looking at, where can these technologies have a difference? And then also keep in mind, we're very global, right? So we've got companies across 5 continents. And so you look at that and you got to understand it then in the context of the region and what's around in that region, right? So you can't always look at it as like only on a global aspect and say, well, you can just take this solution and put it there. It doesn't exactly work like that, right? And there's a lot of local nuances to these markets, and different products and different solutions will end up emerging in different regions.
So it's not then about here's a technology, how do we apply it? It's more, here's a problem that either we've identified or a company that we're interested in has identified, and then so often obviously they'll base it on a sort of technology solution, but then it could be, well, how do you solve that problem using the technology available that we're aware of, and sort of do it from the sort of problem solution standpoint?
Yeah,
right?
always problem first. Usually it's not a problem that we identify. Like hopefully some much smarter people are identifying the problems and validating the problems. I mean, it might be things that we understand and have seen sort of in our experience, but like at the end of the day, we want to know that this sort of works for a much larger sort of group, or the bigger problem sort of in inefficiencies in business, et cetera, right? And so we're always looking for that additional validation. We do have something called the Global Expert Network, which you're actually a part of, and that's where we also have incredible individuals from all walks of life that are among the best in the world at what they do, and they actually also help us to understand some of these things and some of these problems in different industries, and help us to validate that, or help our companies to validate that and better understand that. So this has been really, really incredibly helpful for our startups as part of their journey.
Well, yeah, talking global, I think is I mean, everybody talks about global. It's clear, I think, with the Blockchain Founders Fund, you do have companies from all over. I was talking to somebody the other day, actually, who is they're based in Turkey. There's guys all over the place. But I guess one of the things here, I think, is are we seeing particular trends coming out of particular places that are interesting? Are there particular regions or countries where you think, well, this is where it's at right now, or these places, more than one perhaps, and this is going to transform everything? I guess what I'm driving at is, we think a lot perhaps about the rise of Asia in broad terms. I guess we mean the rise of China when we say that, really. And sort of maybe countries, developed nations in the West, having been used to kind of leading the way on a lot of technology, then that's probably not the case anymore. What kind of trends do you see emerging there in terms of, well, really, we all have to be aware of what's going on around the world, because the cutting edge of change is it's not here anymore, it's over there, or it's over there, or like what do you see emerging in that sense?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, right? I mean, I think sort of the rise of Asia, like you've had, China is obviously the big part of that story, but you have South Korea and Singapore stories that are unprecedented, right? Some of the biggest, or deep. So those are basically essentially among the biggest improvements in human history in such a short period. Um, but China, of course, I think is the big one, right? Like you look at, I think taking over 900 million people out of poverty in sort of a 30-ish, just over 30-year span is unprecedented, right? And this was not through charity work and donations; it was through fintech and technology, and that's an important thing. Like fintech can even be a social cause, like it's a social enterprise in some ways, because you look at the impact of the number of people that it's had, and that's unprecedented, right? And so it's interesting to sort of start looking at some of these things in that way. Um, China, of course, is making very big strides on sort of like machine learning and AI. Some of that, of course, may have to do with sort of data protections and their sort of more leniency around that. Um, but that's obviously, I think good for them, right? And they're making sort of good progress on a lot of these technologies. Obviously, people disagree with different countries' rules. Like that's not something we get into, right? But um, you look at then like what China's doing, as well as a lot of countries across Asia, but what China's doing with blockchain from a government and corporate perspective is pretty incredible, to be honest. It's definitely among the highest investment in the world. There's definitely among the most progress in the world on that front, and that's very fascinating. I mean, there's also the central bank digital currency that you might have read about with the Chinese yuan, and this is going to help create more efficiency for their currency, right? Because there's all sorts of things that they can do when you start talking about a digital currency in form, right? And so think about like um, counterfeits. Obviously, it's basically like leakage to an economy, right? Because counterfeit currency essentially is just someone else is using this current, like someone else is basically creating a currency and using it in that sort of same way. And so you could eliminate that completely, right? If you had a fully digital currency and you no longer had a cash-based currency, which is sort of like where this goes in the long run, right? There's no scenario, whatever number of years you want to take, whether that's 20 years, 50 years, 1,000 years, at some point everything's digital, right? So like
Yep.
we move in that. People have different perspectives on when that'll be, but like we move into a digital world. And so you can eliminate all counterfeit currency. You can then, like, if you're, China, and have capital controls, because like you won't be able to create it on the ledger. So like it would never be able to be used if it wasn't officially part of the ledger. But then, you could have, for example, China has capital controls, which as do a lot of other countries. India, South Korea's got a form of it.
Yeah.
All sorts of countries have it. You could create rules that allow you to follow those capital controls in a more effective way, but also enabling cases where it's going to drive business adoption or business sort of dealings that are beneficial to the country to have sort of different sets of rules. And so, because you can now essentially create programmable money in the long run, right? Where there's like a number of different sort of aspects. If you're an individual account, like an individual person, that money can only be moved at 60K a year, for example. But if you're a business, you can do a $50 million acquisition, maybe, right? Like, with this, but like now that creates huge efficiency for the country and the currency, because it can actually be used in the ways that the government's trying to design it to be used. Whether or not you agree with the government designing ways that you should use your money is a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But you can, whatever your goal is, you can make that more efficiently done, right? And that's sort of what I'm trying to get across. And so China is doing a really good job of that according to the goals that they're setting out. And they're definitely leading the pack globally. But you're also seeing some interesting discussions in other countries right now all around the world. The US has talked about the FedNow system, which is they want to essentially create direct sort of payment rails. It seems to sort of sounds like compete with Visa and MasterCard, which would be interesting. But they've talked about sort of a direct sort of payment rail in the country. Whether or not they'll do it with special interests and other things is another discussion, but they have announced something along these lines. And there's a lot of other, interesting experiments happening I think, globally around these technologies.
This is an interesting point I think you've touched on there. If we look at, again, in mainly, I guess, in Western developed countries where you have a lot of legacy infrastructure, a lot of legacy kinds of business, in that context, a lot of these technologies or new ways of solving these problems are becoming a serious challenge for people. We're likely to see, I think, quite a few big industries decline in importance. A lot of big companies probably either waste away, go under, go bankrupt, get bought up by somebody else. I think for people who are worried, and again, something like AI, I think, is a real trigger term, because AI in a lot of people's minds is we're going to replace all the jobs and nobody's going to have anything to do and blah blah blah. For people who are worried about this kind of stuff, or who are aware of what's going on but don't really know, like they're vaguely aware, they read something in the press maybe, but they don't really know what's going on, what sort of advice would you have to people who are interested in or worried about maybe the challenge to their career and what have you? How do people now look at sort of riding these trends, or you making hay off these trends rather than being kind of overwhelmed by them?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question, right? A lot of different, I think, impressive sort of world leaders have different views on this, or corporate leaders, et cetera. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we don't know what'll happen, right? And I think that's the key thing. I mean, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, probably no one could have told you that we would have gotten to here in the way that we did. I mean, 20 years ago, probably most people didn't even necessarily have the sort of things that they can do now with like internet and video processing and videos, like all sorts of stuff, right? Like that you can do now that you couldn't do before. Like everyone's businesses are pretty much digital, or digital is a big part of a lot of businesses, like a lot of corporates now, that it wasn't, that long ago, right? And so all of this sort of stuff is changing, and where it sort of goes in 20, 30, 40, 50 years over the course of a career is very difficult to predict. I do think that AI will replace a lot of jobs. I mean, and it's not, it's a lot of different types of jobs. It could be like trading, right? Like a financial trader. Those are high paying jobs. Like machines can do it better already in a lot of cases. There's already a lot of proven cases where machines have made better decisions than humans to lead to like massive windfall returns. I think the Japanese pension system is actually an example where they made several billions of dollars on a trade that was made by a machine, not a human. And so you look at that and you're like, well, if this technology just gets better and they're just consuming more data, at what point is it replacing those groups? And then like maybe new jobs get created, but is the number of jobs that get created as many as what was replaced? And that's where it does get scary. I'm sure like entirely new sectors open up and all of that, of course, and there's going to be more jobs in some of those sectors, but overall, like I'm not so sure, right? And you look at, truck drivers, for example, like that's a good one where, driverless cars will be a thing. Like it's already essentially shown that this works to an extent. It can be more efficient. It can lead to less accidents. Like what point does it happen? I mean, it's just regulation and a guess on how many years, right? Like it's not that it'll never happen. It's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but it's going to happen. And so like, this is scary, I think, for a lot of people, and it should be, I think, to an extent. And this is where hopefully governments step in and do something. I think the universal basic income and like other sort of things are good exercises. You look at countries that have a better social net, for example, the Nordic countries, and they can drive more innovation and entrepreneurship, and that's what can create even more jobs. And so can you entice and incentivize people to get rid of that bottom sort of scary part of being an entrepreneur and decrease that risk? And a great way is these sort of systems, right? I think an important part is just being agile, understanding, keeping your skill sets up, understanding how things are changing in your industry, and maybe the new normal in the future is having multiple sort of side gigs, and like gig economy is of course growing, but multiple income streams in case one of them goes wrong, right? And that's probably going to be an even more and more important thing as we move forward than it has been in the past.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting challenge, I think. Because again, even as you say, I'm based in Europe. Even across Europe, you have all these different models of how government and business works together, how they treat innovation, how they look at technology. Some, I think you've got a lot more interaction between, say, government and other public bodies and the private sector. In others, there's less so. In some countries, it seems to lead to a good feeling, a good sort of community spirit that everyone's in it together. In other countries, it leads there. I think there's a certain stagnation around it, and people just don't. I think in some countries there's a little bit of a head in the sand mentality of like, we don't want to change. We're just going to sort of try and keep everything as it is, which seems a bit self-defeating in the long run. So I guess it's a matter of like change is coming. Somehow we all have to deal with it, like all societies or governments or communities or businesses and everybody around the world, right? We've got to adapt to it.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those things that we just can't sugarcoat, right? The future is not going to be similar to the past in the sense that, you know, what our parents did or what you may have been doing in your career, like these things can change and the jobs fundamentally are going to change, right? And that's where I think that agility and just keeping on top of what's going on and having different sort of streams of income, I think are going to be pretty key going forward.
But do you think more as well? Because if anyone who might look at your kind of LinkedIn profile or anything really publicly about you can see all this big long list of all these educational institutions that you've been to and all these things that you've studied. And so you're a big believer in the value of education. Clearly. Now, do you think for a lot of people, maybe where time is a factor or money or opportunity maybe is a factor, do you think perhaps more online learning that you referenced earlier actually might be a solution for people?
Yeah, so absolutely, right? I mean, there is no time in human history where you've been able to access pretty much all of the world's information at relatively no cost, right? You can probably even in a lot of cases learn more valuable things than you can in a lot of these institutions, because like you can learn from like real cases and what's going on in sort of a way that's different from, you know, learning out of a textbook, right? You have different forms of learning. You have experts that you have more access to than you've ever had before. You can hear insights from the world's best business leaders almost on demand. I mean, like you can go on YouTube and see what their thoughts were for the last 6 weeks, right? Or last month, or when they came, like they're doing, like you can see all of these things. And these are all forms of learning that I think are fascinating because you've never had such an ability to access this content. And so I think it has a very big impact. I think the future, these credentials, I mean, can be important, but they're probably less and less important because that playing field to sort of leapfrog or jump and get out of whatever conditions that you're in. Let's say you're from a lower income sort of bracket. I mean, my parents are refugees. And so, you know, to be able to leapfrog out of that, you have a better opportunity now than ever before, right? With, you know, very basic things like a computer and internet, like fairly low cost. You have pretty much almost a level playing field with almost anyone else in the world, right? Like which is very different from in the past. And so I mean, I am a big proponent of education, but in whatever form, and the best form in reality is experiential learning. Like do things in scenarios where you're going to learn in a very practical way. I think obviously theoretical learning is still very important for sort of like brain exercise and sort of pushing boundaries. But I am a very big proponent of education in sort of various forms.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, this leads me nicely. I think we're almost at the end here, I think. But of all the things that you've done, because education leads me into this because there's a lot of stuff you've done in education. You've been on advisory boards, University of Toronto, doing various things like that. But of all this stuff, so UN consultant and sort of consulting with INSEAD and obviously the work with Blockchain Founders Fund and the other fund that you mentioned, of all these things, what is the thing that you're the most proud of?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I love all the things that we do, right? I don't think I'd be able to do uh, what we do if I didn't wake up every day more energized than the last, right? But, probably the thing that stands out to me the most in a lot of ways, so those little things. I think it's those little interactions that drive substantial change in someone's life. So I'll give you an example. So I wrote a few books. I published 3 books. And one of them, and we made them actually free. And the main goal was to sort of help, individuals across different parts of their life. And one of them was called Your Guide to Succeed in University. It ended up winning an international book award and made it to #1 on Amazon for its category. And, I put my email in every single copy. And so I always get tons of emails still on individuals that have read the book and sort of say that it changed their lives in different ways or it helped them in different ways, and literally from all over the world. Like I've probably gotten emails from individuals on almost every continent. And there was a story in particular of a girl or a woman who dropped out of, so she was failing university and dropped out of university. And she read the book and she started emailing me and she said, hey, like, I'm thinking of going back to university, but I'm just not so sure. I wasn't able to pass any of my classes before. And we sort of wrote back and forth for a while. She ended up going back to school. She gave her a lot of sort of additional advice and stuff. And she ended up going back to school, becoming an A student, crushed her classes, got an incredible job afterwards. And then I got like all of these sort of emails about how this completely changed her life, changed the trajectory. Like, she didn't know what would happen if, she stayed in sort of the path that she was going in. And sort of those sorts of stories, I think, really help put to light, like, really the difference that it's making. And I think every day with our companies and what they do, they make those similar sorts of stories and impacts on people's lives and creating value in different ways, whether that's for businesses or individuals. And like that, as at the end of the day, what drives me and drives what we do, and that's what I'm most proud of.
I've read that book actually, that particular one. I think it's very good. It's quite short as well. In fact, I'll put some links actually in the description box to these books if anyone's interested. They want to have a look. Not sponsored here, just in case anyone's interested. I guess one last question though on that is. We've been talking about the challenge of sort of change, technology, and all the rest. Now, obviously, as we're recording this, we're still having sort of pandemic problems. So there's social distancing. Some people are still in lockdown. Some countries aren't. Some, like in Britain, it's a bit of a dance where it's kind of in and out, in and out. But with regard to university, so I have a young cousin who's just about to start university, and then one of the things there is it's like, they're not going to have as much chance to socialize. They're not going to have as much chance to do all the kind of traditional things people would do at university. It might feel like there's less opportunity. What would you say to people who are kind of facing that, sort of how to make the most of the situation where things might not be quite as, well, they're different to how they were before?
Yeah, so the thing is, things always change, right? And it's about figuring out where is there benefits and how do you take advantage of it, right? How do you embrace this change and make the most of it? And so there's a number of things like, for example, as a student now, you can, probably access a lot more other students that you otherwise wouldn't have. Let's say, doing sort of sessions weekly on Zoom and doing breakout sessions, getting to know people on there across all sorts of areas. There's no travel time. You're saving all of that. You can still do sort of different interactions. You can play games with them. You do a lot of things that still build relationships. I mean, we do this with our team, right? We play games with our team every week. We do different activities with them. We do breakout rooms and icebreakers and all sorts of things. But also as a student, you can get exposure to more people than you've sort of ever been able to, right? So during COVID, we found it's easier to sort of connect with people. And so like building sort of like mentors and people that'll be willing to make time. We find a lot more people are open to this sort of thing. And before they were open to it, but we found even more so now. And so, reaching out to, different things you think you might do in your career and I usually recommend finding 3 sets of mentors, right?
Yeah.
So the three sets of mentors would be like one that's sort of a couple years ahead of where you are. So if you're going into university, someone that's in, say, like first, second year, third year, they can learn some stuff from, understand the ropes, what they've gone through, et cetera, right? Try to find someone that's just graduated, for example, from what you're doing, right? So, you know, you think you're going to go study, I don't know, business, find someone and want to work in investment banking, find someone that's in investment banking right now and see if they're willing to spend some time with you and help you learn the ropes and answer questions and help guide you on that path. And that's going to help you teach you a lot. Like whether you want to do it or you don't want to do it, those are great answers because then you have a decision, right? And you can figure out what to do. But then the third sort of mentor, someone a bit more senior, that's sort of gone much further ahead and can sort of give you a bit more guidance sort of more broadly. And there's always things that you can add value to them as well, right? And so, you know, we find that this is also easier to be doing nowadays. There's internships that you could be doing that are more global rather than local. If you were in say a more like university town or like smaller sort of city, you know, there might not be as many jobs that you would have been able to do before, but now you could work with incredibly skilled people in jobs that are remote. And so that's a whole new set of opportunities that you wouldn't have had exposure to, right? And so there's a lot of things that you can do now because of the way things have changed that are substantially more beneficial. And it's figuring out how to take advantage of those things and leverage those things. And I think it can, you know, potentially be even better than the way it was. And it's just about how do you embrace it.
Well, I mean, that feels like a bit of a manifesto for all the work you do, I would say. It covers kind of all of it. New mindset, network with all these people, add value. Yeah, interesting. Well, that's a good note, I think, on which to leave it. So thanks again for your time, Ali. And
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
If you made it to the end of this video, please leave a comment or a question below. I'd love to know what you think about some of the topics we've discussed here today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and sharing it, and do subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with all my videos as they go live. Thank you so much for watching, and stay curious.